Hello students, I am Ishwar, your Polity mentor. We all know Polity is very important for yourself, for your exams, for prelims and mains. So for your convenience, we have divided the syllabus into micro topics. Okay, let us say you're owner of the software company and you have around 200 employees and you have around 100 customers. So how will you manage both? How will you deliver service? How will you create or code? You will regulate them through certain acts or regulations or rules. Similarly, as I said earlier, Britishers used to control India from a distance through these charter acts of East India Company. So in this chapter, we'll discuss about acts from 1793 to 1853. Okay, now let us have a look at a prelims based question. Which of the following British acts gave exclusive trading privileges to the British East India Company? The question is, which gave exclusive trade privileges to British India Company? Okay, the first one is Regulation Act 1773. Second is Pitt's India Act 1784, Charter Act 1793, and Charter Act 1813. Okay, here the answer is Charter Act of 1793. If you remember in an earlier class, we have discussed this. Okay. The next question. Consider the following statements which are related to the Charter Act of 1833. They are asking about Charter Act of 1833. First statement. It allowed missionaries from spreading Christianity in India. Okay. What does it mean? It's saying that it allowed missionaries to come to India. Second, it made British East India Company as an administrative body. The answers are option 1 only, which is correct. Option 1 only, option 2 only, both 1 and 2, D, neither 1 and 2. Answer is only 2, because the missionaries were spread into India through the Act of 1813, not 1833. Only through 1813 the Christians came. So here the option 1 is wrong. So we can eliminate 1 only, both and neither. So option is 2. Okay, now let us have a look at Charter Act of 1793. What is this act? It authorized the company to trade within India for the next 20 years. It said for the next 20 years, 1793 plus 20 years, East India Company you can trade exclusively in India. That was given by this act of Charter Act 1793. What are the features? Governor General was given more powers. From where? From Bombay and Madras presidencies, they became subordinate. Who was the Governor General then? Lord Cornwallis. Okay. It extended the trade monopoly of the company for another period of 20 years. That is the second statement. It provided that the commander-in-chief, for example, if a commander-in-chief was was nominated or selected, he should not be a member of the Governor General's Council. That's what it meant. And then the members of the Board of Control and the staff were to be paid out of Indian revenue. The British Parliament said, all these people of the East India Company are working for Indians and in India, why should the Britishers pay the money? So they said, the money paid out of, let them be paid out of Indian revenue. Who are this Board of Control? Board of Control controls the Governor General. Okay, the next feature of this act was, the company was allowed to increase its dividend by 10%. What is dividend? For example, we all know about share. You have shares about, let us say, you have 10 rupees share. And the company gives you profit of 1 rupee every year. So that means you get 1 rupee profit. And then out of this 1 rupee, the British Parliament gave the company the permission to increase the dividend by 10%. That means from next year onwards, you can get 1 rupee 10 paisa. So that is the increase in dividend. Okay. Why did the company give this option? Why would you give anything? Why would you increase? Because the company is going to take the Parliament is going to take some money from the company. Let us see what are they. East India Company will pay 5 lakhs of what? Of British pounds. You know this note? This is a British pound, 50 pound note. They said every year the East India Company will pay 5 lakh British pounds annually to the British government. Okay, if there is an emergency, if there is a war or defense, the entire money or the revenue of the East India Company can be used for defense. That's what this Charter Act of 1793 said. And then expenses, interest, dividends, salaries of the Board of Control, etc. were to be borne by the Indian Exchequer. That is, our money is used to pay salaries for them. And then if, for example, if a high official, that is senior officer, moves out of India without permission, then he is sacked. It is considered that he is resigned. Okay. And then the sixth one was, it reorganized the courts and defined the jurisdiction. What did it do? The revenue administration was divorced from judiciary. Collector, let us say collector earlier, DC, who had revenue administration plus judicial functions, both were separated. And then this led to disappearance of mal courts or mal adalats. What are these mal adalats? These mal adalats are revenue courts. And this disappeared with this act or Charter Act of 1793. Okay. Let's look at the background of. So 1793 Charter Act was passed. It could not achieve its objective. So again, a Charter Act of 1813 was passed. So what is the background for this? What is the reason for this? Something was happening in Europe. There was a guy called Napoleon Bonaparte. You might have read in your school books. This Napoleon Bonaparte started a system called continental system in Europe. That is, any country which is in alliance with France is not supposed to trade with Britain. British goods are barred from entry into French allies areas. They are prohibited. Due to this, what will happen? The British traders and merchants, they suffered. Okay. So, and the British merchants were allowed. What did they do? So, under this act, the British merchants were allowed to trade in India under the strict licensing system. So, the exclusive rights of East India Company are gone. But the monopoly of tea and trade with China. So, East India Company has exclusive rights of dealing with tea, plus it has exclusive rights of trading with China. Okay. And then what happened in the economic front, in the philosophical front? You all know this guy Adam Smith, father of economics. His theory became popular, and then his theory of free trade policy. This also became quite popular in those days, and all the people vouched for this free trade policy and to allow other merchants into India. So this is the background before passing of Charter Act of 1813. Okay, now let us have a look at the features. As I said, the monopoly in India of East India Company ended, but monopoly of free trade did not end, and monopoly of China did not end. Okay, and and company's rule was extended for 20 years. Don't get confused. It is company's rule. The company can rule for next 20 years. But company can trade, but company is not given exclusive rights. That is the difference. Okay. But what happened eventually in 1857? The company rule is gone, right? So, okay. Third one was, it granted the permission to the persons who wish to go to India for promoting moral and religious improvements. Simply put, they have sent Christian missionaries through this act. Okay, East India Company was asked to keep its territories and commercial accounts separate. What got separated? Territory and commerce. That is, your politics and commerce accounts are to be separate. Okay, and the next feature was the company's dividend was increased from to 10.5%. Earlier it was 10%, from 10% to 10.5%. That means what? It's going to take some more money from somewhere, right? And then it said the company should invest rupees 1 lakh every year for the education of Indians. Okay, coming to education, earlier we had a Gurukul system. We had around 7 lakhs Gurukuls during that time. All these were killed by the Britishers and introduced English education so that we will be born as Indians but will think as Britishers and will support Britishers. So this act of 1813 said the company should invest 1 lakh every year for education. The next one was it empowered the local governments. How did it empower? The local government can impose tax. Okay, and for example, you do not pay the tax, the local government which implemented. So the local government can punish you also who did not pay them. Okay, how do you remember this trick? How do you remember the act? You will be confused. What is it, the act of 1833 or the act of 1813? How do you remember this? Don't worry, I have a trick. Let us say 18 boys and 13 girls were invited to China for tea party. By whom? By Christian missionaries. Imagine 18 boys and 13 girls were invited to China for a tea party to have tea by Christian missionaries and given educational grant to end the trade monopoly of Indian companies. So this is the mnemonic to remember the Charter Act of 1813. Okay, the next act is Charter Act of 1833. So don't be worried, remember the tricks to remember all the Charter Acts. So the Charter Act of 1833, this was the first step towards centralization. So what is this centralization? What does centralization mean? Centralization is nothing but control, that is colonization. So you become a complete British colony through centralization. Okay, what are the features of this act? Okay, the first one was, it said the Governor General of Bengal will become the Governor General of India. So how do you remember this? In your exam you will be confused. Okay, there is year 1833. How many threes are there? 2 threes. Okay, 1 Governor General Bengal. So there are 3 alphabets. This is, and then there are how many threes? 3 threes. Governor General of India. So that is how you remember. In 1833, the Governor General of Bengal became the Governor General of India, and it vested him civil and military powers. More civil and military powers were given to him. For the first time, Government of India having authority over the entire territory and area possessed by the British. Who was the governor then? William Bentinck. He was the first Governor General of India. Which act gave this thing? 1833. I told you the trick, how to remember this. Okay, second one was, it deprived, giving power to someone means taking the power from someone else. That means it took away the power from Bombay and Madras, and they were made, their legislative powers were deprived. The next one was, the acts were called as regulations, while laws made under this act were called acts. What does it mean? Okay, earlier they were made certain acts. Those acts were called regulations. But from now onwards, the laws made under these acts were called act. This means, simply put, regulations are made by executive. Executive is your cabinet ministers or PM. Whereas acts are made by complete parliament. That is PM, member of parliaments, cabinet, everybody is here. So that is why this is called Act from 1833. That means executive to legislative sanction. Okay, what are the next features? It ended the activities of East India Company as a commercial body and it made it an administrative body. What does it mean? For example, Dhirubhai Ambani Reliance was a commercial body, but they have ended its commercial activities and made an administrative body. From that day onwards, they can pass acts, laws. So, similarly, East India Company was made an administrative body. Okay, so that they can control, they can pass acts. The next one was Charter Act of 1833 attempted. The key word is attempted. It did not introduce. It attempted to introduce open competition like UPSC, which you write. Okay, but for selection of civil servants and stated that Indians should not be debarred from holding a place of office or employment under the company. However, it was rejected by whom? Who will reject it? The court of directors. Why? As I said earlier, court of directors select civil servants. So they will lose their power if open competition is started. Thus, that is why they opposed it. But the Charter Act of 1833 could not introduce the system it tried to introduce. Okay, now let's go to the next act, that is Charter Act of 1853. Why it is called an act? It has legislative sanction, executive to legislative sanction. Okay, the Charter Act of 1853. Who is the gentleman on the right? He is Dalhousie. He is the Governor General of India as well. Who is the first Governor General of India? I have told you, try to answer. Okay, what are the features? It first time separated legislative and executive. Okay, functions of whom? Of Governor General Council. This gentleman has a council, right? In this council, legislative and executive are separated. Okay, what is legislative and executive? Legislative is to design a law, make a law, or form an act. And executive is to execute that act. Okay, and then in this it said 6 new members were added to legislative council. To this council, 6 new members were added. And then in other words, it established a separate Governor General Legislative Council. And this came to be known as Indian Central Legislative Council. And this council, it functioned as a mini parliament. Okay, to this council, 6 new members were added, and this functioned as a mini parliament. Okay, and then it also introduced an open competition system, which was failed earlier in 1833. In 1853, they introduced this open competition to Indians for covenanted civil services. What is covenanted? Covenanted is like your IAS, IPS, that's the higher civil service. Okay, according to the Macaulay Committee, the Committee on Indian Civil Service was appointed in 1854. You have to remember this for your prelims as well. Okay, this was the last series of act passed by them, and this also has a constitutional landmark. And let's look at the next feature. It extended the company's rule. In the year 1853, it extended what happened in 1857? The company was unfortunate, it could not enjoy its extension. But okay, and for the first time, the local representatives in the Indian Central Legislative Council were introduced. Where were they introduced? In the central local representation in the council. Of the 6 members of the Legislative Council, Governor General's Council, 4 members were appointed from 4 out of 6 were appointed from Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. The trick is MBA, Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. 4 members out of the 6 were appointed from Indians. Okay, now let us have a look at a mains-based question. The Charter Act of 1813 was important benchmark in the push towards westernization. It is a fantastic question. The question is, let us understand the question. It says, the Charter Act of 1813. What does it say? I'll come to this. Was an important benchmark to push westernization. So let us say, what is westernization? Westernization is following Western practices, Western cultural practices, Western political practices, Western social practices. Okay, that you introduce with the definition of westernization, and then you go to the body. In the body, you specify about Charter Act features, like they have sent all the features of 1813, and then you mention these points in the body, and then you conclude that, and you also write about negative points about the British 1813 Act and it failed. And then 1833 was also passed and 53 was passed, and then you conclude saying that there was an impact of Charter Act of 1830 to make India into a westernized state. And with this, we end this lecture. Thank you for listening. Let us meet in the next class.